Captain David Harlan has attended 43 formal diplomatic dinners since taking his posting as senior human liaison to the Thessari Imperial Court, and he has developed exactly one rule that has kept him alive, employed, and diplomatically viable through all of them. Never react to anything you don't fully understand. The rule has served him exceptionally well across 4 years of navigating Thessari social complexities, a culture with 8,000 years of accumulated protocol, unspoken rules that can end a career with a single misplaced word, and social hierarchies so intricate that even senior Thessari officers sometimes step into political landmines they didn't see coming. Tonight's dinner is a formal affair celebrating the continuation of the Earth-Thessari alliance. Approximately 60 attendees seated at 10 round tables, Thessari nobility, military commanders, diplomatic officials, and a small human contingent including David, 2 junior diplomats, and Ambassador Williams. The setting is one of the Imperial Palace's smaller banquet halls, intimate enough for conversation, but formal enough that every gesture, every expression, every word carries cultural weight that extends far beyond the dinner itself. The Thessari are imposing in formal dress. Their elongated ears are adorned with decorative pieces indicating house affiliation and personal rank, their skin showing carefully managed colors that communicate social confidence without revealing anything that could be used against them politically. David has spent 4 years learning to read those colors with enough accuracy to navigate formal events without creating incidents. He's seated at the third table from the head, positioned between Ambassador Williams on his left and a Thessari noble named Lady Sorethas on his right. A senior diplomat who has been testing David's cultural competence all evening through increasingly subtle conversational provocations designed to see whether the human liaison will stumble. David has navigated each one without incident, which Lady Sorethas seems both impressed and mildly annoyed by. The dinner is proceeding smoothly. Courses arrive with Thessari culinary precision, conversations flow in the carefully modulated register that formal events demand, and the political currents beneath the polished surface remain hidden beneath layers of practiced civility. David is in the middle of explaining human approaches to agricultural diplomacy, a deliberately safe topic that Lady Sorethas raised specifically because it carries almost no political implications when the incident happens. At the adjacent table, a young Thessari boy of approximately 8 years old has been growing visibly restless throughout the dinner. The boy is Mathrin, son of Lord Vethros, one of the more politically influential nobles present, and his presence at a formal diplomatic event suggests careful political calculation on his father's part. Children at events like this are rare enough that their inclusion is always deliberate. David has been peripherally aware of the boy's fidgeting for the past 20 minutes. It's a familiar enough sight. Children at formal events are universally miserable regardless of species, and he's paid it minimal attention. Children squirm. It's what they do. The boy has been growing increasingly frustrated with the requirement to sit still and silent through adult conversation that holds no interest for him. His skin has been shifting through restless colors, bright yellows and impatient oranges that mark a child struggling against behavioral expectations he doesn't fully understand or agree with. David notices the boy's posture shifting, straightening, his attention fixing on something across the table with the focused intensity that children display when something has caught their genuine curiosity. Lady Cathara sits 3 positions down from Mathrin at the same table. She's a senior military commander. David recognizes the insignia indicating 30 years of service and a rank that places her among the highest-ranking officers present tonight. She's been conducting quiet conversation with the noble beside her, her skin showing the confident gold of someone completely comfortable in her authority and social position. Lady Cathara has an unusual physical characteristic that David has noticed during previous encounters but never remarked upon. Her elongated ears are significantly longer and more pronounced than standard Thessari ears, extending well past the decorative pieces that most attendees wear. It's a genetic variation that David has observed in approximately 3% of Thessari individuals across his years of service. Longer than average ears that are functionally equivalent but visually distinctive enough to draw attention if someone is looking. David doesn't know the precise cultural significance of this variation. He's learned enough about Thessari biology to understand that ear length falls within normal genetic variation and carries no functional difference. What he hasn't fully mapped is the social weight that physical differences carry in Thessari culture. Whether longer ears are simply noticed and accepted, or whether they carry associations that make them sensitive topics in certain contexts. He's about to find out. The boy Mathrin has been staring at Lady Cathara's ears with the unfiltered fascination that children bring to anything that strikes them as unusual. His mouth opens before his father can intervene, before any adult in the vicinity can anticipate what's coming, before the social machinery that normally prevent children from saying things that adults have learned not to say can engage. Why does that woman have such funny ears? The words land in the space between tables with the clarity and volume of a child who hasn't yet learned to modulate his voice for formal social situations. Loud enough to carry, clear enough to be unmistakable, innocent enough that no one can claim they misheard or that the comment was ambiguous. The reaction is immediate and unmistakable. Lord Vethros goes rigid beside his son, skin flashing crimson, the specific shade that indicates embarrassed anger directed at someone under his responsibility. His hand moves toward Mathrin's arm as though to physically redirect his attention, but the damage is already done. Around the adjacent tables, skin colors flash through startled white before carefully resettling into controlled neutral silver. Conversations don't stop completely, but they shift, volume dropping, attention redirecting, the social machinery of a formal event recalibrating to accommodate a moment that has suddenly become significant. And Lady Cathara, 3 positions down from the boy who just commented on her ears, goes completely still. Her skin shifts from confident gold to carefully controlled neutral. Not shocked, not offended, simply still, the way a person becomes still when they are choosing how to respond rather than simply reacting. Then she begins to turn. David has been watching Lady Cathara from his position at the adjacent table, because the social dynamics in the immediate vicinity have shifted in ways his 4 years of training have taught him to pay very close attention to. Something significant just happened. He can read that much from the cascading skin color changes rippling through the assembled guests. But he doesn't fully understand the complete cultural weight of what or why. What he understands with absolute certainty is this. A child made an unfiltered comment about a senior military commander's physical appearance at a formal diplomatic dinner. The comment was innocent. Children's unguarded observations about physical differences are universal across every species David has encountered and are rarely intended as insults regardless of how they land. But the room's immediate reaction tells him the comment has touched something sensitive in ways that extend beyond simple social awkwardness. And now Lady Cathara is turning. Not quickly, not with the sharp, reflexive motion that would indicate surprise or hurt. She's turning slowly, deliberately, with the kind of measured, controlled movement that David has encountered before in specific contexts, and that he has learned carries very particular meaning. He's seen this exact movement once before in 4 years of service. During a diplomatic reception 14 months ago, a junior Thessari officer made an inadvertent comment about a senior commander's house affiliation, something that touched on old political rivalries between noble houses that the junior officer hadn't been briefed about. The senior commander had turned slowly, exactly as Lady Cathara is turning now, and the entire reception had gone silent within seconds. Not from commanded quiet, from recognition that something was happening that required everyone's full attention. Captain Vethros, David's primary Thessari cultural guide, had explained the gesture afterward with the kind of careful precision he uses when teaching David something important. The slow turn is not anger. It's not offense. It's authority being exercised deliberately. It means, I am aware of what was said. I heard it clearly. I am choosing how to respond, and that choice will set the terms for how this situation resolves. Everyone in this room should pay attention, because what happens next will matter. The slow turn is simultaneously a warning and an invitation. Warning, I have noticed what was said, and I am not going to pretend I didn't hear it. Invitation, this is the moment where someone can clarify, correct, or contextualize before I determine how the situation resolves. Whatever happens next happens on my terms. David understands this immediately and completely. Lady Cathara is not reacting to the child's comment with hurt or embarrassment. She is taking control of the moment through measured, deliberate movement that commands the room's attention without requiring a single word to be spoken. She is establishing that this situation will resolve according to her authority and her choice of response. And David knows, with the kind of absolute certainty that comes from 4 years of learning exactly when cultural instincts override conscious thought, that this is not the moment to speak, not the moment to move, not the moment to draw attention to himself in any way whatsoever. The slow turn is Lady Cathara's moment. The room belongs to her right now in a way that transcends formal rank or social position. Any intervention, however well-intentioned, however diplomatically careful, would be an intrusion into a dynamic that she is controlling, and that must resolve on her terms. So David does exactly what his rule has always told him to do when he encounters something he doesn't fully understand but recognizes as significant. He stares straight ahead, perfectly still, and does not react. His posture doesn't change. His expression doesn't shift. His hands remain where they are on the table. He doesn't look toward Lady Cathara's table, doesn't glance at Ambassador Williams for guidance, doesn't make any movement that might signal awareness of what's happening or desire to participate in it. He simply becomes still. Completely, deliberately still in a way that most people never are at formal social events where constant, subtle movement, adjusting posture, reaching for drinks, shifting attention between conversations, is the baseline behavior. Ambassador Williams, seated to David's left, shifts almost imperceptibly. David can feel the ambassador's instinct without looking, the trained diplomat's response to potential incident, the desire to smooth, to manage, to offer some kind of cultural bridge before the situation escalates into something that requires official attention. David places one hand very slightly on the edge of the table. A signal they developed months ago through necessity rather than planning? Don't. Not now. Let this moment be what it needs to be. Williams holds still. Lady Cathara completes her turn. She now faces the direction from which the comment originated, toward Lord Vethrose's table, toward the boy still sitting in his seat with skin colors beginning to shift from bright childhood curiosity toward anxious awareness that something in the room has changed because of words he spoke without understanding their weight. The boy's father has gone rigid beside him, skin showing the deep crimson of someone caught between anger at his child and desperate concern about how this moment will resolve. Lord Vethrose's hand is on Mathrin's arm, not pulling, just holding, the physical equivalent of a parent silently communicating, "Please be still, please don't make this worse." Lady Cathara says nothing. She looks at the boy with an expression that David, from his adjacent vantage point, reads as something more complex than anger or offense. Her skin shows colors blending authority gold with something softer, patience, perhaps, or assessment, or the particular kind of measured attention that comes from someone who has navigated similar moments before and has learned exactly how much weight to give them. The silence extends. David counts seconds without moving his eyes or adjusting his posture. 5 seconds of absolute silence in a room full of 60 people at a formal dinner. 10 seconds. 15. Each second feeling longer than it actually is because the entire room is holding its collective attention on this single moment, waiting to see how Lady Cathara will choose to resolve it. 20 seconds of silence in which no one speaks, no one moves, no one breathes quite normally. Then Lord Vethrose breaks. His skin cycles through embarrassed crimson and desperate purple as he turns to his son with the expression of a parent who has just watched his child create a social situation that could have serious consequences. "Mathrin," he says, his voice carefully controlled but carrying unmistakable tension beneath the surface calm. "You will apologize to Lady Cathara. Immediately." The boy, Mathrin, looks at his father with genuine confusion, written across his skin in bright, unfiltered colors that children display before they've learned to manage their emotional expressions. He looks at Lady Cathara, still watching him with that measured, patient attention. He looks back at his father. "But I just asked why her ears are long," Mathrin says, his voice carrying the bewildered honesty of a child who genuinely does not understand what he's done wrong. What did I do? It's the kind of question that only a child would ask in this moment. Not defiant, not calculated. Simply the honest confusion of someone who observed something unusual, asked about it, and can't comprehend why the adults around him are treating the question as though it was something dangerous. Lady Cathara's expression shifts. Something in her skin colors changes, the hard authority softening into complexity, layers of response visible beneath the surface in ways that suggest she's feeling more than she's showing. She looks at the boy for another long moment, then speaks for the first time since the comment was made. "You didn't do anything wrong, child," Lady Cathara says. Her voice is calm, not cold, not performatively warm, simply steady in a way that immediately draws every remaining conversation in the vicinity to a complete stop. The words carry the particular authority of someone who has thought carefully about exactly what she wants to say and is saying it with full awareness of how it will land. "You asked a question," she continues, looking directly at Mathrin with an expression that has settled into teaching gold. The specific skin color that Thessari use when they've chosen to educate rather than punish, to use a moment for instruction rather than correction. Questions are not wrong. Curiosity about things you don't understand is not wrong. What you did was notice something about my appearance and ask about it. That's a natural response to seeing something unfamiliar. She pauses, and David watches the room absorbing every word with the focused intensity of people who understand they're witnessing a moment that will be discussed and analyzed long after this dinner concludes. Lady Cathara is setting terms, defining how this incident will be understood and remembered, and everyone present knows it. "My ears are longer than most Thessari ears," Lady Cathara continues, maintaining steady eye contact with the boy. "That's a genetic variation that occurs in our species. Some Thessari have it and others don't. It doesn't affect how well I hear. It doesn't change who I am or what I'm capable of. It's simply a physical difference, nothing more complicated than that." She glances briefly at Lord Vethros, whose skin is still cycling through embarrassed crimson, then returns her full attention to Mathrin. The glance carries meaning that David can read even from his adjacent table. "I understand your concern for your son, but this situation doesn't require your management. I'm handling it." "Your father is embarrassed," Lady Cathara says to the boy, "because he believes your question was rude." In Thessari culture, commenting on someone's physical appearance at a formal event, particularly when that person holds senior rank, can be considered impolite. There are rules about what adults say to other adults in situations like this, and your question didn't follow those rules. Another pause. The silence around them is complete. 60 people listening to a military commander use a child's innocent observation to say something that extends far beyond the dinner table. But, Lady Cathara continues, and the single word shifts the entire dynamic of what she's saying in ways that David recognizes as deliberate and significant. Rudeness and curiosity are fundamentally different things. You noticed something about my appearance that looked unusual to you, and you asked why. That's curiosity. That's how children learn about the world, by observing and asking questions about what they see. The problem wasn't your question itself. The problem was that you asked it in a setting where adults have specific expectations about what kinds of comments are appropriate, and no one explained those expectations to you beforehand. She looks around the room, at the nobles, the commanders, the diplomats who have all been watching this exchange with absolute attention. Her gaze moves across the assembled faces with deliberate slowness, making eye contact with several senior officers before settling back on the boy. "I suspect many of you were uncomfortable when this child's question landed," Lady Cathara says, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Some of you immediately assumed the situation required careful management, diplomatic intervention, social smoothing, careful navigation of what might become an awkward incident. Some of you were preparing to judge how I responded, whether I would take offense, whether I would use this moment to assert authority or create political complications from what was clearly an innocent observation." Her skin settles into clear, confident gold, authority being exercised with absolute certainty about its own legitimacy. "I choose none of those responses. I choose to answer the child's question honestly and directly. And I choose to use this moment to say something that I think needs to be said in this room, Physical differences are not insults unless we collectively decide to treat them as such. My ears are long. That's a fact about my appearance. It doesn't require apology from a child who simply noticed it. It doesn't require embarrassment from his father. It doesn't require careful diplomatic management from anyone present. She looks at Mathrin one final time, her expression settling into warmth that transforms her entire bearing from commanding authority to something more personal. You asked a good question, child. The answer is simple. I have longer ears because that's how I was born. It's not funny or strange or something to be uncomfortable about. It's simply how I look. Now you know, and there's nothing left to wonder about. The boy's skin shifts from anxious white through relieved blue and settles into the bright, satisfied curiosity that children display when they've received an answer that genuinely resolves their wondering. Okay, Mathrin says, with the simple acceptance that only children can produce in situations that have held entire rooms in suspended tension. It's such an ordinary word. Okay, spoken with such casual finality that it almost punctures the gravity of everything that preceded it. Almost. David, watching from his adjacent table, feels the tension he's been holding since the moment the child first spoke release gradually from his shoulders. Lady Cathara has handled the situation with a grace and authority that transformed what could have become an uncomfortable diplomatic incident into something meaningful. Something that will be remembered not for awkwardness, but for how it was resolved. But he also notices something he wasn't expecting. During her response, Lady Cathara's gaze had swept across the room in a deliberate arc. And when that arc reached David's table, when her eyes found him sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead, completely motionless in a room full of people who had been shifting and adjusting and visibly uncomfortable, something in her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a flicker of recognition, a brief acknowledgement of what his stillness represented and what it had contributed to the moment. It's a look that communicates without words. I noticed you didn't react. That was the correct choice. And it mattered. Ambassador Williams leans slightly toward David, barely perceptible movement, and whispers with the kind of quiet precision that years of diplomatic service develop. That was well handled. By her. And by you. By me, David whispers back. I didn't do anything. Exactly, Williams replies. That was precisely the right thing to do. The dinner resumes around them. Conversations restart gradually as Lady Cathara's response provides a clear framework for how to process and understand the incident. Some guests spend the remainder of the evening discussing what happened. David can read the analytical blues and contemplative purples in nearby skin colors that indicate active processing of the moment's implications and what it might mean for broader social dynamics. Others simply move on, accepting that the situation has been handled with authority and grace, and that there's nothing remaining to manage or navigate. David returns to his conversation with Lady Sorethis, who regards him with an expression that suggests she's reevaluating something about the human liaison she's been testing all evening. You didn't intervene, she observes quietly, her skin showing the analytical blue of someone examining something with genuine interest. No, David confirms, keeping his voice equally quiet. Many humans would have, she continues. Ambassador Williams almost did. I noticed his posture shift before you stopped him. A diplomatic comment about the child's innocence. An explanation of human curiosity about Thessari physical characteristics. An offer to smooth the social situation. Any of those responses would have seemed reasonable. They would have seemed reasonable, David agrees, but they would have been wrong for that specific moment. Lady Sorethis' skin shifts through contemplative colors. You understood that Lady Cathara needed space to handle her own moment, that any intervention, however well-intentioned, would have undermined the authority she was exercising. I understood enough to know that, David says. 4 years of paying close attention and learning from mistakes tends to build that kind of instinct. Lady Sorethis' skin settles into warm gold, genuine respect that carries weight coming from someone of her rank and experience. That instinct is rarer than you might think, Lieutenant, even among Thessari officers with decades more experience than you have. The formal dinner concludes without further incident. David completes his duties with practiced efficiency, ensuring the junior diplomats navigate departure protocols correctly. exchanging final pleasantries with Lady Sorethas, coordinating with Ambassador Williams on post-event observations that will go into the diplomatic report. He's halfway through the palace corridors on his way back to the human liaison quarters when he hears footsteps behind him. Not fast, not urgent. Measured, deliberate footsteps at a pace that's slightly quicker than casual walking, but unhurried enough to suggest intention rather than urgency. David stops and turns, his posture relaxing from the slight military alertness that palace corridors naturally trigger into something more open. He's learned over 4 years that unexpected encounters in palace corridors are usually intentional. Someone wanted to speak with him privately and chose this location and timing deliberately. Lady Cathara stands behind him, still wearing her formal dinner attire, her elongated ears catching the corridor lighting in ways that make them look almost luminous. Her skin shows colors David hasn't seen her wear before. Complex layers, blending gratitude gold with assessment blue, and something that looks like genuine curiosity about the human who sat perfectly still, while the room held its collective breath around them. "Lieutenant Harlan," she says, using his rank with the precise formality that indicates she looked up his service record before approaching. "Walk with me." It's not a request, but it's not an order either. It's the kind of invitation that the Sari of senior rank extend when they want conversation without the formal structure that official settings impose. David falls into step beside her without hesitation. They walk together through the corridor in comfortable silence for several minutes. David doesn't rush the conversation or fill the silence with small talk. He's learned that the Sari who initiate private conversations after formal events do so because they have something specific to say and will say it when they're ready. Filling the space before they're ready would be intrusion rather than engagement. "You were very still during what happened at dinner," Lady Cathara observes finally, her voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing something she's been thinking about since the moment it occurred. "Remarkably still. Most humans I've interacted with in situations like that, situations where something uncomfortable happens in a social setting, would have attempted some kind of intervention." A diplomatic comment. An explanation offered to smooth the moment. An apology extended on behalf of the child or his parents. Something. "Most humans don't understand what the slow turn means," David replies, keeping his own voice conversational and unhurried. "I do, or at least I understand enough to know that it required space rather than intervention." "You understood that my turn was a moment of control," Lady Cathara says, and it's not quite a question. Not a moment of anger or hurt. A moment where I was choosing how to respond rather than simply reacting. And that any intervention from anyone else, no matter how carefully constructed, would have disrupted that choice. "Yes," David confirms simply. "How did you learn that?" she asks. Understanding the slow turn well enough to recognize it in real time and respond correctly, that's not something most cultural briefings cover in sufficient detail for practical application. 4 years of paying close attention, David says, and occasionally making mistakes that got corrected by Captain Vethros before they became serious incidents. Cultural instinct builds gradually. You can't learn it from documentation alone. You have to accumulate enough experience to recognize patterns when they're actually happening rather than after the fact. Lady Cathara's skin shifts to thoughtful blue as she processes this. "And during tonight's incident, you applied that accumulated understanding without hesitation, without looking to your Thessari counterpart for guidance, without second-guessing yourself. You simply knew that stillness was the correct response, and you maintained it for the entire duration of the moment." "I knew it was correct for that specific situation," David says carefully. "There are plenty of circumstances where intervention would be the right choice. But when someone is exercising the kind of authority you were exercising, using a moment to set terms and demonstrate control over how a situation resolves, intervention from anyone else changes the dynamic regardless of what that intervention says or intends." They walk in silence for another minute before Lady Cathara speaks again, her voice carrying something that sounds like old experience speaking honestly rather than performing authority. "I want to tell you something about what happened at dinner," she says. "Something I didn't say in front of the assembled guests, because the moment required a different kind of response than honesty about what I was actually feeling." David waits. maintains the stillness that has apparently become his defining characteristic in Thessari social interactions. Gives her the space she needs to say what she wants to say without rushing or prompting. The child's question didn't offend me, Lady Cathara says. My ears have always been longer than standard Thessari ears. I've dealt with comments about them my entire life, some cruel, some genuinely curious, some well-intentioned but uncomfortable in ways the speaker didn't intend. Tonight's question from Mathrin was purely curious. There was nothing malicious in it whatsoever. Children observe the world without filters, and what he said was simply an honest observation about something that looked unusual to him. Her skin shifts to something David recognizes as old weariness mixed with hard-earned peace. The particular combination that comes from someone who has spent decades navigating a specific kind of attention and has eventually found a way to carry it without letting it define them. What I actually wanted to do in that moment, my genuine first instinct when I heard the comment and felt the room's reaction shift, was to feel angry. Not at the child, at the room, at all the adults who heard an innocent question and immediately assumed it required careful social management because of what my ears look like. At decades of formal events where my physical appearance has been treated as something that needs to be navigated around rather than simply acknowledged as a fact about who I am. She pauses, but anger would have given the comment more weight than it deserved, would have confirmed the room's assumption that my ears are a sensitive topic requiring delicate handling. By responding calmly, by taking control of the narrative and defining how the situation should be understood, I denied the comment the power that an angry or hurt reaction would have given it. You turned an uncomfortable moment into an instructive one, David observes quietly. I chose to do that instead of several other responses that would have been equally justified, Lady Cathara confirms. And the reason I was able to make that choice, the reason I had the space to think about what response I actually wanted to give rather than simply reacting to what had happened, was partly because of what you did. What I did was nothing, David says. Exactly, Lady Cathara replies, and there's something in her voice that suggests this is precisely the point she's been building toward. Your stillness, your complete refusal to react, to intervene, to fill the space around my moment with anything. Words, gestures, expressions of concern or diplomatic management. When I turned and saw you sitting perfectly motionless, staring straight ahead, completely unresponsive to what was happening, it reminded me that not everyone in that room was looking for the situation to be uncomfortable or requiring management. Someone understood what was happening. Someone recognized that the right response was to let me handle it. Your stillness gave me a reference point, a confirmation that the space I needed to exercise my own authority was being preserved rather than filled. She stops walking and turns to face him directly, the corridor quiet around them. In Thessari culture, we have a concept called Seithara, she says. It translates roughly as the power of the space someone chooses not to fill. It refers to the authority that comes from deliberate restraint, from choosing not to speak, not to act, not to intervene when doing so would be the expected response, and when silence or stillness is actually more powerful than action. Her skin settles into warm gold, genuine respect offered without ceremony or performance. What you did tonight was Seithara, Lieutenant Harlan. You recognized that the space around my moment, the silence, the stillness, the absence of intervention, was what gave my words their full weight when I finally spoke. And you chose to preserve that space rather than fill it. That choice contributed to how the moment resolved more than any intervention could have. I just didn't react, David says. It felt like the obvious choice in the moment. It was the obvious choice only because you understood enough about what was happening to recognize it, Lady Cathara replies. Most people, Thessari and human alike, feel compelled to do something when something uncomfortable happens in a social setting. To help, to smooth, to manage. The instinct to act when tension exists is powerful and deeply ingrained. Choosing not to act when an action is more powerful than action requires understanding that not every moment belongs to you. That sometimes the most significant contribution you can make is simply staying out of the way. She holds his gaze for a moment longer, long enough to communicate something that doesn't require words, then turns and walks away down the corridor with the same measured, deliberate movement that had commanded the room's attention at dinner. David watches her go, then continues his own walk back to quarters. A child's comment had slipped out, innocent, unfiltered, too loud for the space it occupied. The room had shifted, conversations faltering, skin colors changing, 60 people registering that something significant had landed in their midst. An alien woman had slowly turned, not in anger, not in haste, but with the measured authority that signaled control and set terms for resolution. And a human had done nothing, had stared straight ahead, had remained perfectly still, had chosen silence and stillness over every instinct that said to intervene, to smooth, to manage, to help. Because sometimes the most powerful thing anyone can do is recognize that the moment isn't theirs, that the space around someone's authority is precisely what gives that authority its weight. That filling silence with words, no matter how careful, no matter how well-intentioned, can diminish the very thing it's trying to support. Sci-Fi. The power of the space someone chooses not to fill. David had filled nothing, had preserved exactly the space that Lady Cathara needed to exercise her own authority on her own terms and